Hello and welcome to In Stitches. I've got quite an interesting one today, I thought, in that I've got this little Baby Lock Overlocker here, or Serger, model number BL3-406. And the fault with this machine is that it's not feeding. Now, just a quick note on the Baby Locks. These don't look like much, but these are beautifully made. They're made by Juki, as far as I understand, in Japan. This is a Juki Corporation on the back here. There's a label there. Number BL3, made in Japan. So you can't go wrong. Juki make very nice industrial sewing machines. And this one is a very well made machine, as I say. So if you know, they don't look like a lot, but you know, they're very smooth and very robust. But anyway, this one's got a little fault I'll show you in a second. This one's the 3-thread, as I say. They come in various configurations. There's a 4-thread version, but it's slightly different to what we would call a standard 4-thread. The 4-thread version has a 2-thread overlocking stitch and a 2-thread chain stitch alongside it. I don't have one I can show you, unfortunately, at the moment. The customer said that the machine wasn't feeding. The threads are about to come unthreaded there, but I'm not really worried about that at this stage. But if we just put a little bit of fabric under here in the meantime, and we'll turn the machine, you'll see it's not feeding. I'll just get you in a bit closer. We've got power on here. You can see it's not feeding at all. Now, if we have a look at the feed dog here, this is the feed dog you can see with the serrations on it here. You might be able to see that it looks like it's doing what it should. I'll take the presser foot off here, just so that you can see it better there. And you'll see feed dog is feeding, or appears to be. It's feeds coming up, feeding the material, and then dropping down below the plate and returning to come back up again to do another feed. So you'd sort of wonder what's going on, and there's a couple of things that you could check. And one is that the presser foot here is still springy. Sometimes what can happen is the little hinge here can seize up, get all rusty. But that one's looking fine. And the other thing that could be an issue is that you might find that the presser bar here is, you know, seized or doesn't have any pressure on here, but that looks fine. So that's this bar here is where the presser foot attaches to there. So there could be a couple of reasons why this is not feeding, but it's neither of those. I've checked that. And if we have a wee look here, I'll turn the machine so you can see it feeding there, but if I put my finger on the feed dogs, you'll see that it stops feeding. It looks a bit strange, and first thought, you know, that might cross your mind is, well, I wonder if there's a broken gear or something like that. There are no gears in this machine. Let's flip the side open here and tip the machine back. Okay, so I've just got you in for a close look. I've got the machine tilted onto its back there so we can see underneath. This is the bottom of the feed dogs there, okay? So you might be able to see them feeding there. Okay. And so you can see there that this carrier here is connected to this linkage here. And that linkage is driven by this here, this collar. So you can see that turning there, this collar, nicely. But if I hold back on the feed dog like I did before, there you go, see, it stopped turning. Even though I'm turning the machine, you can see the looper there going back and forward. Okay, if I let go again, it'll drive. So that's pointing to these two screws here that tighten down onto that shaft being too loose. And if I have a I'll check of that here. Let's have a look. Yep, loose. Loose as. Now, let's have a check this one. Yeah, that's loose as well. We can't just tighten them up willy-nilly, they have to be timed, but just to demonstrate this, I'll just nip that up slightly. And there we go, we're feeding again there. Okay, now as far as the timing of that goes, I'll show you a general rule of thumb. So I'm just going to loosen that. Okay, so there we go. I'm turning just the feed mechanism there. You can see the motion of the feed dog there. So it's coming up through the plate and it's feeding down through the plate, returning. Okay, so general rule of thumb is if you turn the machine in operating direction, which in this case is the opposite to a standard sewing machine, just for the Baby Lock here, but just make sure you're turning the hand wheel in operating direction. And then a quick and easy way of doing this is to bring the feed dog so that it's done its feed. So make sure you've got your stitch length set, you know, probably best to set it on the longest stitch length there. Make sure that you turn the feed in the operating direction, and just until the feed comes along and just starts to drop down below the plate. So that's when the fabric will stop feeding, and then turn the hand wheel in operating direction until the needle just starts to come down to the plate. So probably just above it slightly. I mean, I don't have the service manual for it. You can do this sort of thing by eye. You get away with it if you don't happen to have the service manual for it. It sort of goes for any settings that you do for the feed mechanisms on a machine. And conveniently, the screw just happens to be right there for me to tighten. Nip that up there. Okay. And if we take a look here, I'll turn the machine in operating direction. You can see while the needle's in the material, the feed dog is returning, so it's under the plate, it's not feeding the material. The feed dog starts to come up. So as the needle comes out of the fabric, you want to make sure that the feed dog is not feeding while the needle is in the material. So as it comes up, you'll see the feed dog's coming up as well, and the feed dog is starting to feed now. There. Needle's still out of the material, needle's coming back down into the material, feed dog is starting its return there under the top surface of the plate there. That might be coming up. The feed here might be a little bit advanced, so it might be starting to feed a little bit too soon. So I'll just retard that slightly, just to give it a little bit more clearance, and just in case it's starting to feed while that needle's in the material, which will cause needle deflection, and machine won't sew very well like that, and could break needles. If you've got the timing completely out, the feed dogs could be trying to feed while the needle's right in the material, and more than likely it just won't feed. It'll cause all sorts of issues. It'll probably rip the material and deflect the needle, and all sorts will happen there. So just make sure you've got that right. Okay, just checking that. So, yep, feed dogs are coming up. I just want to retard that slightly. Top of the feed dog is just under the surface of the plate there, and you can see the needles coming up out of the material. The feed dog's about level with the plate now, so you can see that the needle's fairly clear of the material there. Get you a better angle, you can see that just there. And you also have to consider how thick the material might be, but for an overlocker like this you wouldn't be doing too thicker materials, but on a machine that's sewing something quite thick, you have to consider that and make sure that the needle's clear of the thick material before this feed dog starts to feed here. And you can see it doing its feed there. and then dropping down below the plate as the needle comes back down. And that's it. That's feed timing done. Someone hasn't done that up, I would say, when they've changed the feed timing, if they've had to change it at all. I'll just tighten those up there. That's good. And I think now that will be fixed. Let's just do a quick test here and see whether we're feeding there now. And there we go. Okay, I'm not threaded here, so it's not actually stitching, but I'll thread the machine up and I'll show you it sewing. Just like that. So that's it for this one, a reasonably quick one today, but I had this on the bench and I thought I'd quickly show you that. Oh, by the way, there's the direction of operation here. We've got an arrow there and an arrow there, and you can see that it turns the opposite way to a normal sewing machine. I mean normal in quotes. This is more like an industrial overlocker or serger you would see. It would turn this way. So this is more like a industrial machine. These are good heavyweight machines too, and you can see that they, you know, that's reasonably smooth. You know, it's not bouncing over the table like you see some sergers bounce a lot over the table and they're extremely noisy. This has not even been serviced. This is just as I got it from the customer. But, you know, I'll go ahead and service this machine. It needs a good clean and oil. But, you know, it's in pretty good condition. So yeah, thanks very much for watching. As always, thank you very much to my patrons on Patreon, and we'll see you in the next one.